Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses today. I really appreciate the effort you put into your testimony. I found it all to be very informative. Attorney General Grewal, and looking at your comments, your testimony, I see that you made an assessment that New Jersey classifies white supremacist extremists and homegrown violent extremists as the most persistent hostile actors in the state. And that was after the background you gave in your testimony. You started with Timothy McVeigh, which I think for myself as an adult, that was my first clear memory of domestic terrorism, though, I mean, obviously back in the 60s, we had the Weather Underground and other groups like that, but that was a very significant event. Timothy McVeigh was clearly, at least from what we learned of him, a white supremacist. He was also anti-government. You also referenced the attack in New Jersey in 2019 that killed 6. That was actually perpetrated by an African-American anti-Semite. You referenced the gentleman, well, not gentleman, but Mr. Brahimi from New Jersey, who was arrested January 6th. He's currently awaiting trial on a number of charges. And then also the Parkland shooting in Florida that was attributed to a person with severe mental illness that should have never happened, and that was known, and had the system worked, that tragedy could have been avoided. But I was kind of puzzled from your testimony to how you drew that white supremacy is the overarching threat to the state of New Jersey. And then I thought, well, maybe you'd made reference to a source that was cited also in this memorandum about the hearing we have today that was done by Department of Homeland Security's a Homeland Threat Assessment. And in that assessment, so I went looking for that, thinking, well, surely there must be a lot of meat on that document there that I'd like to learn about. What we received was an unclassified summary of a document. So I have to assume that if we got an executive summary, there's an underlying document. This was unclassified. Our staff tried for a couple of days to dig that up. We're finally told, no, we can't get that. There's not an unclassified, but apparently there is a classified document, which I think would be very informative for this committee. I would love to know what that document gets into. I think it's something we should have a follow-up meeting about. But within the bulletized executive summary, it says the intelligence community assesses that U.S. racial and ethnically motivated violent extremists who promote superiority of the white race are the domestic violent extremist actors with the most persistent and concerning transnational connections. The reasoning it cites is because they have similar ideological beliefs with people outside the United States, and they frequently communicate with and seek to influence one another. To me, I'm not really sure how those two criteria there justify white supremacists being the most violent threat that we face as a country. But I'm sure there's more in that classified document that I would hope we get to. But when we look at events that have happened over the also the document makes further reference to other groups, domestic violent extremists, racially or ethnically motivated violent extremists, animal rights, environmental violent extremists, abortion-related violent extremists, anti-government, anti-authority violent extremists, and then all other domestic terrorism threats. So this DHS document refers to a lot of different threats, with white supremacy only being one of those, and yet that seems to be the only topic, or the only focus of this hearing today. That's a little concerning to me. But moving on to Professor Simi, I really appreciated your work. Obviously, you spent a lot of years studying this topic, and I found that to be very informative. You talked about Timothy McVeigh as well, the Olympic bombings, but then you mentioned that had the perpetrators been people of color or Muslim, you could be sure the response would have been dramatically different. So I actually had our staff do a little research over the last couple of days, pulling domestic attacks just over the last 10 years. And we really do become desensitized to this as a country. I started going, and there were at least 15 here, but I got to tell you, some are high profile, like the Boston Marathon bombing. Obviously, that was a Muslim extremist. We had the San Bernardino, California shooting that killed 14 Muslim extremists there. The Orlando nightclub shooting just down the road from me in Florida, Central Florida, that killed 49 people, also not white supremacy. New York City truck attack in 2017 that killed 8, again, not white supremacy. Now, there are examples of that, and I'm not trying to say that there aren't, but there's a lot of violence in our country, and a lot of people are being killed unnecessarily, and yet we're choosing to zero in on a very small piece of this. I know I'm almost out of time, but Professor Simi, I'd love to hear your comments about what terrorist extremists look like, because it seems to me, and to cite, not spitting on Dr. King's grave, I have tremendous respect for him. I think he would be ashamed of what's been happening in our country. He would have never condoned $2 billion of violence in a 2-week period last year. But it does make me wonder when you say extremism and terrorism are not about what you look like. Extremism and terrorism are defined by a person's beliefs, feelings, and characters. And just a question for you, sir, would it be fair to summarize that as saying that it's about a person's character and not the color of their skin?
Okay, the gentleman's time has expired, but you can answer that, Dr. Simi.
Thanks for the question. That would be fair in terms of what I'm trying to get at. It's about beliefs, feelings, and behavior, not about what we think in our mind an extremist or terrorist looks like based on our preconceived notions and our biases. And there is research that shows, for instance, mainstream media outlets do treat acts of violence differently based on race and religion, ethnicity of the perpetrators. So we do have, these biases that are swirling around that affect how we see different types of violence. I'm not suggesting that there aren't various sorts of different acts of violence committed by a whole host of different actors, but we treat different kinds based on race, ethnicity, religion, and other characteristics differently than the kind that we're talking about here today in terms of white supremacist and anti-government militia extremism.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I apologize for going long.